at this point, I'm ranked like on Elo Ranking. I'm number 2 in the world in Magic. That was like definitely pretty scary, but also something that like really motivated me. Not even skirmishes. I haven't even played a single skirmish. Only armories. Then I also think that one of the best things for leveling up is if you playtesting against random people on Talishar, it's not gonna help you that much. And this led me to a spot where I was 7-0. So I'm definitely locked for top 8.
Welcome back to Draw 4, your best Flesh and Blood resource. Today we are welcoming Simon Nielsen, who won Danish Nationals on Lexi Livewire. Congratulations, Simon, at first, and I'm so stoked to talk to you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's been quite a surprise for me to take down the Danish Nationals. I was quite worried about. There's some pretty good players. We've had like Sebastian Gondale on this channel earlier as well. I watched that video. I was like, okay, this is who I have to beat if I want to become the international champion.
Yeah, and you faced Sebastian in the finals on
exactly like we planned. I faced him in the finals. Yeah, playing Bravo. Yeah, running it back to Birmingham.
So we will talk about your deck list today, but also roughly about you entering Flesh and Blood, because actually you are not very new to TCGs. Some of the viewers will already know you from your past successes in Magic.
Yeah, it's true. I've played, this might come as a surprise, but I've played Flesh and Blood for 4 months only. And only at the Armory level. Like Nationals was my first actual competitive Flesh and Blood tournament. So this is why I was quite surprised to take on the victory. But also I can see how it makes sense given that I have played Magic for 12 years and I've been playing it professionally for at least 5 years. And at this point I'm ranked like on Elo Ranking. I'm number 2 in the world in Magic. After some incredible like back-to-back Pro Tour top 8 finishes. I definitely have a lot of card game knowledge, but yeah, I was surprised like how well I were able to translate it into Flesh and Blood, even though the game is completely different.
Yeah, so I had an experience similar to what we are talking about today in Germany, because Christian Haug, who is a former Flesh and Blood player and was a Magic pro, also did come to the nationals in Germany and won right away. Yeah, just having a few experiences in Flesh and Blood. So it is very interesting to talk to you now about your view here on nationals. I have for the viewers the information that we will split up the interview in 2 parts because we want to focus in this video on the Danish nationals and your experience there, and in a second video we will talk in depth about you coming over to Flesh and Blood and your view also as a not leaving but also now playing Magic the Gathering besides Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right, so for me it will be really interesting to dabble now into your experience because it is very crazy to talk to Sebastian before talking about the Danish nationals. And now you are facing him off in the finals. Can you tell me, just for the start, how do you view Sebastian as a competitive player when facing him in the finals?
Yeah, so I knew at the time of the Nationals, he was ranked like number 28th in the world, I think. So I definitely knew that it wasn't just a case of like big fish in a small pot, which can sometimes happen in like small gaming communities, where someone is really the best player in a country, but not necessarily like that good on a worldwide scale. But I knew that Sebastian was that. I knew he was fresh off of a top 8 in Birmingham, and generally momentum is a very real thing, and he was playing the same deck again. And so like that was like definitely pretty scary, but also something that like really motivated me. Like it would be quite fun to have Sebastian as my final boss. I did also defeat him in the draft rounds, but that was not really my deck was way better than his, so it was like that wasn't really the tough match. So yeah, it was like quite a nice challenge, and he definitely seems like someone who he's been playing card games for quite a while, and it seems like even though he's not a Flesh and Blood grinder, he seems to have a very pretty good like understanding, like baseline understanding of the of like card games, how they work and like how to navigate these. And this is like what like shows in the way he plays Flesh and Blood that he's very, very talented.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I didn't knew Sebastian before Flesh and Blood, but as soon as I got to know him, like, he's one of the top players here in Europe that we have in this community. And I'm so stoked that we will also see in the next bigger tournaments, because actually we will have the World Championship at the end of the year in Europe. If some of these players from Europe, including Sebastian and yourself, how they position in the World Championship when they face off the North American, the Oceanic, and the Asian players. Let's come to the Danish nationals before we get to those topics. So you already touched on how long you are playing Flesh and Blood, but what was your intention when you entered the nationals before only playing skirmishes?
Yeah, not even skirmishes. I haven't even played a single skirmish.
Only armories, sorry, yeah.
Only armories, yes.
That's crazy.
So it felt, like a friend introduced me to Flesh and Blood like back in April or May. And it was like someone like who like I play Magic with, and so he knew that he could just introduce me with, okay, I have a couple tier 1 decks, you learn to play by playing Phi against Bravo or whatever, like something like that, right? And then we just like played. And then at some point I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna explore this a little bit. And then I realized it turned up at an armory, like barely knew that much, because even though I played like 3 constructed matches, like I didn't really like, there was a lot of baseline understandings that I didn't have. But then I heard that there was like nationals that was like end of August, which was like the perfect timing, because it was like, because there were like, in terms of like my Magic career, if I do any other game, I try and make sure that the tournaments I prep for are like not at the same time as my Magic tournaments.
Yeah.
And so end of August was like perfect, because I had the Pro Tour in Barcelona, which was like the last Magic Pro Tour, happening at the end of July, and then I would have all of August to actually play Flesh and Blood. And then in September, there would be the Magic World Championship. So it would be a perfect transition where I had this like August off, and it would be fine to play Flesh and Blood. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to try and be up for the challenge. Like, the friend who told me how to play the game really recommended the thing of like, you just throwing yourself out there into a new game where you're like, you don't know everything yet, and you're trying to like figure it out on the fly. And that's been like really interesting, and especially like with then setting myself up for nationals. So it felt like a pretty nice motivation to try and see, okay, I can actually like do this thing and challenge myself. And I definitely thought it was possible for me to make the top 4. That was like my goal, right? I wanted to like go to Barcelona for Worlds, Flesh and Blood Worlds. So I was trying to like aim for that, but I knew that I wasn't going to have too much constructed experience. So the thing I focused the most on was just like trying to grasp the limited format. I thought it was very interesting, just figuring out a limited format in another game. Like, it's the way draft works is like, at least like, the rules are the same, but like the actual mechanics of the strategies of the draft are just like quite different. And then also figuring out how to play each of the heroes, which seemed very important. So I actually spent a lot of time like just playing. I had a Prism draft deck and a Chain draft deck from Armories that I played against myself for like hours and hours, until I like learned how to pitch deck with Chain, which is really important for that hero, and learn how to like beat someone who tries to just play defense and tries to fatigue you. So I was like, we did this, and I talked to my I'm gonna keep mentioning this friend here, the Julia Fleury of Switzerland, who was the one who taught me how to play Magic, right? Taught me how to play Flesh and Blood. Yeah. Like him and I, we like went pretty deep on the draft prep. We did like draft simulations where we would like just simulate all 8 seeds of the same draft on draftfab.com.
Oh.
And just go over each and every pick together, like discussing it. So I was actually like feeling pretty well prepared for the draft portion, and that's what I was aiming for. And then for constructed, I was hoping I could like borrow a good deck and then like, learn the baselines, watch some feature matches, but not, and then see if I could get some wins there. And then maybe I could see, okay, if I do well in draft and I do okay in constructed, that could maybe be a top 8. And then if I happen to win the quarters, like I get there. So that was like how I envisioned it in my head, but it was mostly focusing on draft.
Yeah, but you definitely just didn't go to the nationals and thought, let's have a little bit of fun, and that's it.
No, I once like since it was a challenge, right, I also want to make sure that I'm not just like showing up for okay, we'll see what this is about. I actually wanted to like try and give it some amount of effort. Of course, I couldn't prepare for months ahead because of Magic, and I also had like some school stuff like a bachelor thesis and we'll get back to another exam. I had the deadline was like Sunday, like the Sunday after nationals, or like on the actual day of the top 8. I had a pretty big important paper of 20 pages that I needed to finish, and it's like it's really big deal. It's like my last like retry of that exam, so if I fail that, like I don't have any education, so there's a lot of pressure on that thing, which meant I couldn't actually like spend too much time like grinding on Talish or anything.
Yeah, so pressure is a pretty important keyword here when not only having all this stuff going on in your life, but also going to the highest tournament in your home country. To players who are viewing this, that want to exceed to the next level because we want to extract some pro level information here, how would you tell a Flesh and Blood player that is at his armory and skirmish level and actually at the next season wants to come to the top? How can you hold on this pressure and take it a step further?
Yeah, it's definitely like important to like challenge yourself and ask, like demand yourself to do like actually put some effort into it if you want to excel. So there's some amount of pressure there. The issue is though there's also such a thing as like too much pressure, and so I really think like a healthy, like you can have like healthy expectations. So like for instance, my expectation for this nationals was I could see it being possible that I could make it if I apply myself. And this is important because if I don't think it's possible, I'm probably not gonna even to put any effort into it. But I also realized that like I'm definitely not favored to do so. I'm just gonna put in the effort I had time for, and then like we'll see how the chips fall. And if I can go out in the tournament being happy with okay, I learned a lot of new things. It was pretty fun trying to apply myself, but I went like 5-4, and that was okay. That's something I told myself before the tournament. It's like okay, if I go 5-4, I'm probably pretty happy with that since it's my first tournament. So like that like amount of like healthy pressure is like a good thing. Then I also think that one of the best things for leveling up is trying to surround yourself with ideally better players, or at least like people who are at your level, especially people who are at your level of ambition. So you might talk to people who like seem more talented in Flesh and Blood but don't really care too much about doing well in tournaments, and that's not gonna push you as much forward as finding someone who's a similar-ish level as you but who actually also want to get better. Because then like you can play this together. If you play testing against random people on Talishar, it's not gonna help you that much. The level there is simply it's too unpredictable, and you're never gonna. You can do really well against Lexi on Talishar sometimes, but then in the actual tournaments you might die to them. This happened to my quarterfinals opponent, Nielsen, who was like 7-1 against Lexi with her Icelander deck on Talishar, but then in the nationals and PTI, I think she went 0-7 against Lexi. And so this is the big difference in if you have someone to prepare with who like wants to get better, you can like play games with them and try and review these games, and it helps so much to like, not do these things alone. It's also like the secret to like how I did so well in Magic. It's like always trying to surround myself with good teammates.
Yeah, so the topic of choosing a team and having pro teams in TCGs, I want to talk about a little bit deeper in the second video with you. But I recently also talked to the Finnish national champion who won on Raina. And what you just mentioned about Talisha, he was bringing it up too. He has about a 40% win rate with Raina on Talisha against Lexi, but he also said like he doesn't really think that in the real situation on tournaments like the World Championship or Nationals, you can count those numbers in. But one really important thing I think that I want to hear a little bit deeper from you now is your testing, because you already said it, you need to surround yourself with like-minded people and with players who also want to really challenge their limits. So how do you look at it now after the national championship? Will you test more also with Danish players, or are your testing partners all around the world in Europe? Where are you testing with, and whom is it?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been preparing for this national like only with like people from a little bit of like people from Copenhagen because of the Amories, and there was like the community who like lent me the Lexi deck, which I was extremely grateful for. I actually thought I was going to be borrowing a Dash deck for a lot of the time, but so that's like the deck I was actually like studying. And then like about a month before the tournament, I realized I could borrow Lexi instead, and the guy who was lending me Dash wanted to play it himself, and it was like, okay, that's probably like the best thing I can do for my chances, because Lexi's the type of deck where like I can mess up and still do fine. So even though, so I think ended up only having 10 matches of Lexi played beforehand. Probably not really that much experience. And I think actually the first like 3 matches I had was like the guy who lent me the deck forgot to put Codex of Frailty in it. So and so when I played him out, it's like, okay. But that was actually fine, because then I just got to focus on like learning the baseline. Okay, how do you actually shoot 3 hours a turn with Lexi? This is how it works. Okay, that's the base play pattern. And so you can add on top of that. But so in terms of like testing, also going forward, I'm definitely like gonna continue working with Julian of Switzerland. Just like a good friend of mine, and I know we work well together. I'm not gonna put that much effort into Flesh and Blood. I'm still going to try and have it on a hobby level, but I talked to Sebastian about teaming up for Worlds, because he also has this sort of approach to, he's also a student and is not going to like try and want to grind 24/7, but having someone where I could be like, hey, do you want to play like for a couple hours tonight on Challenge Shore? Yeah, absolutely. Like that sort of commitment is like what I'm looking for. And then I think there's a couple other people from the Copenhagen area who are qualified, and I'm gonna look forward to working with them and trying to keep it more local.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because in Europe we have so many diversity in all of the countries and have really competitive smaller communities in Flesh and Blood. And so I'm really looking forward with you teaming up with your local players and what you will bring up for Worlds then. That will be really interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. It's nice that also the constructed deck I spent the most time on was Mechanologist. And look, we're going to Mech City.
Yeah, so let's actually come to that now, because you talked about why you choose Lexi a little bit. Mm-hmm. Tell me about your thoughts behind it. Like, where do you see Lexi before you attended the Nationals with her?
Yeah, so it seemed from what I could gather that like Lexi was like clearly the best deck in the format. And I don't think I like quite realized like how great it is. And there's also like some just a lot of things being figured out with like how to build her. So the greatest like advantage I have here is that Julian was working on Lexi, like he was locked on Lexi for his Nationals. Mm-hmm. So the fact that I like not only got to like borrow the best deck in the format, but also would make sure that I would have a good list, because I know that Julian was working on it and I trusted his assessment pretty well. And I think that the version that we had here was like really good as well. Obviously, like I don't have the full scope of the other potential ways to build Lexi. I don't know all the like cards that are potentially playable in Lexi. Yeah. Like I'm reading a lot of cards when I play tournaments still, but from what it seemed from like the few versions I tried, I think it makes sense that we have this version here with 6 codexes and 6 winter spites.
Yeah, so we will look into that at the end of questions a little bit deeper.
Sure.
But let's give the viewers a little bit more context on Nationals now, because all the Nationals are really diverse and also very different, not only from their attendancy, but also from their meta. Tell us a little bit more about Denmark. How many players were attending and how was the meta there?
Yeah, so there were like 54 players in attendance. And I think like specifically Lexi and Icelander were quite well represented. Dromai was like not that, it didn't seem that there were too many Dromai players, which is probably just a local difference. There's also in Denmark, we have these 2 big hubs, which is like the Copenhagen area hubs and like Northern Zealand and like this whole area where these are the people that I've met and played with. And then there's the other end of the country, which has a big city called Aarhus. There's also this pretty close to ECAST, which is where Sebastian Grøndal is from. And there's like Michael Bonde, who's also a Magic player, who lives in Aarhus. So there's like these, and so I assume that a community there was also going to be pretty strong. You know, like Victor Brøcker, who's also like one of the best players in Denmark. also like in the Aarhus area. So actually, like from playing in Copenhagen, where like it seemed like the environment was like a little bit more casual, I was fearing that like in Aarhus the players were gonna be like pretty good and have like maybe competitive drafts and so on, like doing drafts like outside of the armories and like arranging stuff like that. So I was fearing that that would be the competitive hub. Also, when I looked at results from Birmingham and I saw no names I recognized from Copenhagen, I saw there's 2 Danes in one in top 8 of the Calling and one in top 8 of the Battle Hardened, and I thought, okay, so this is actually like the hub of the good players. It's not like the Copenhagen one. Turns out I was a bit wrong, because actually I hadn't known that we had a former national champion, Jonas Bensati, who was like the guy who like took me under his wing in like when I got to armories, and he was like, hey Simon, yeah, I'm gonna teach you like how like all this stuff works. And Laura Nielsen, who I also mentioned, my quarterfinals opponent, like, she had also debated the last 2 nationals and already had a PTI for Worlds. And she's also someone who's like actually is at a pretty high level, but wasn't really attending many armories, so I had no idea about that. So actually, it seems like the Copenhagen people had like a lot to work with. And we ended up being 3 people from Copenhagen in the top 8 of nationals, and actually Jonas ended up winning the PTI the next day. So so Copenhagen took down like both events in the weekend, which was pretty nice. So I'm gonna eat my words in that one. I think maybe we are just like not an underdog.
Wow, that's really interesting to hear about your like local rivalries and stuff like that. That's amazing, and I'm looking forward to hear more of it in the future. That's really interesting. Let's talk about your matchups. We wrote about this before, but I want for the viewers get more details on this, because I think it's really important to see which heroes you faced and what kind of difficulties you encountered on the way.
Yeah, actually my very first round was against Danny, who is the guy who lent me the Lexi deck. So he's the type who like really enjoys games for like the challenge of it. And once Lexi became like really good with the codexes and like stopped having like the whole fuse package be a thing, even though he loves the deck, like he was just like off it and wanted to explore like more challenging decks. So he was playing Winston that he's been like trying to work on and building, and then that's why he could lend me his Lexi cards. We were super grateful for that. And then we had this like really interesting dynamic where he knew like every single card in my 75 or 80 because he of course like built the deck for me. So he knows all I have to work with, right? I read every single one of the cards he played, because I had never played against Vincent before. So like they could try and piece out what's going on there. And there was at some point where like he got the tempo on me and got like a 22 damage swing turn pretty early on, which like put me on the back foot. And then he just got rune bladed as it just drew hands of all non-creatures or non-attacks and all like attack actions. So these hands like don't actually work because it like doesn't have both pieces. And so I ended up like somehow like managing to squeak turn the tempo around again, because Lexi's just so consistently good at presenting damage. And I had a turn where I had a really well-timed Witcher's Bite, where I forced some blocks out of him, and then I had the Witcher's Bite plus a Codex that like ate his whole hand. So he couldn't actually use the Winston ability. And made a rune chant, and I was like pretty low on life at that point. I think I ended at 1 life. And so removing that 1 rune chant was actually really important, because I got to eat his whole hand with Witch's Bite plus Codex.
Wow, so after facing Vincent, who was your next opponent? So
in round 2, I played against Lexi, and I still hadn't played much with my deck beforehand. This was actually my first Lexi mirror ever. So I knew that the like matchup was like, it was okay to like not know exactly what you were doing, because it was a lot about who drew the most power cards. And I think I got a pretty I had definitely like, some turns where I completely messed up with like my codexes and ended up like discarding one codex to the other and stuff like this, right? Where it's the growing pains of learning Lexi. But in reality, I drew 3 Rain Racers and 4 codexes and 3 of a kind or something like that, and he drew like 1 codex. Okay. So I had like, all the power cards like every turn, and that made it like a bit of a cushion. Of, okay, now I've played the Lexi mirror and I know a bit more about what to do and like how not to play. But I got bailed out because like I just had the better draws. Which means that in round 3, I'm faced against another Lexi mirror, but this is against Victor Beuker, who I mentioned earlier. Maybe the second best player in Flesh and Blood in Denmark. And so he was also on Lexi, right? And we had this like really interesting game where I actually think I played much cleaner than I did in round 2. Maybe also knowing that, first of all, having the experience of the first match there in round 2, and also knowing that I'm against someone who's, this guy's really good. So I gotta make sure that I'm also like up to speed to beat him. And I think, I didn't miss a single tunic trigger. I was happy about that. This is the levels that I'm like excited for. And I think I actually sequenced pretty well. And I think like Victor was doing like a lot of tricky stuff, but the fact that I just have a few good like codex strikes that all lined up pretty well meant that I just got super ahead on life like pretty quickly and ended up like taking him down. So yeah, that was like pretty nice, because that was a game where I just understood a little bit more what's going on, and I actually think I played pretty cleanly. But also, of course, I think my cards lined up like better than his did.
Yeah.
So that put me at 3-0 going into the draft, which is like I was ecstatic about. Because also it means that like I get to draft with like in the top pod, and I think because of all the like work I put into drafting, it pays off better if you're like in a strong pod. Because like there, like all the signal sending and reading and like all these things. Yeah. It's like even more relevant. So yeah, I was pretty excited to sit down and draft pod with Jonas and Laura and Michael Bundy and Sebastian. These were all like players in my pod.
Amazing.
So I was so that was really nice. And I ended up like I was like my strat was like to try and lean towards chain, but also just try and stay open. So like as soon as I get a signal of something else, like I'm gonna try to pick up on it. I think that in Flesh and Blood draft, you can't stay too open, because if you're the last person to choose, you're gonna have. It's gonna be like the draft pod. Like ideally, there's gonna be like 3 prisms and then like 1 Bolton and like 2 of the other of the shadow heroes, and then you want to be the 1 Bolton or whatever like hero is like the one of. But if you choose last, you're never gonna be the only one in a certain hero, because all the heroes will have been picked at that point, and you're also not gonna be like the second prism, because there are already going to be 2 prism drafters. So you're going to have this spot where you're going to have to choose, and you just don't have a good option. But if you actually claim your seat, there's a chance you can end up being the only one in your hero because of the signals you're sending around the table. If you keep taking if there's packs with only 1 rune blade common, and you take that, you kind of send the signal to everyone else that, oh, okay, someone else is in chain.
Yeah.
And you can dictate the draft a little bit that way. So it's of course a little bit risky, because that also means like sometimes we get pushed out and you read the signal and then you have to move off and you're like down 8 playables and you have to scrap a little bit. But I also think it gives like the highest chances to have a great deck. And so what happened was that I got past a second pick, Seeds of Agony, and I was like, oh, okay, that's probably like the best card in the pack. I'm gonna take it here, and then just like realized, and then I just keep taking a Rune Blade card, and like clearly like this like chain is super open. Ended up being the only chain at the table. And in pack 2, I opened a cold foil Dredge Scythe. So it was just completely perfect. And I had never played with this card before. Like I'd practiced a lot of chain with like the pitch deck chain and like trying to, let's set up this, okay, on turn 6, I'm gonna try and deal you like 18 damage or whatever, like that type of chain deck. And so the Dredge Scythe allows you to play a different type of game, I've heard, but I hadn't ever seen it in action. So I was like, I guess like my deck is so good that I'm just still gonna do the regular chain thing, but also just have a Dredge Scythe on top of it. And yeah, my deck could like, I think I had 12 spells that dealt arcane damage, plus like my scythe. So it was like pretty. I had like 6 Seeds of Agony. Yeah. At the end, and all the cards you could want, I had like multiple of them in like different colors, and they were completely busted. Like even without the scythe, it was probably one of the better decks I've seen, and with the scythe, it was like definitely the best deck I've ever seen in Monarch draft.
Wow.
So yeah, that made the draft round a little bit easier. I beat Michael Bundy in round 4, who was like, it's kind of like we have a friendly rivalry going on for Magic, and like I was joking to people that like one of the reasons I wanted to play Nationals was like come and beat Michael, because he shouldn't be able to like escape into a different game and feel safe. And then I came and I beat him. So that was good. And like against Prison, I had a turn where I forgot to make a Soul Shackle, so it just like made my attack, and then he blocked or whatever, and then I realized oh, actually, I have no more actions. I have 3 cards in hand. I guess I take 3 of my Blood Dip and draw a card and almost die. Just like, I forgot to make the Soul Shackle. But the deck was, again, like, strong enough that I could still, win like through that. But it definitely put me on the edge a bit. Yeah. And then I played against Sebastian in the finals of the pod. Mm-hmm. And he had drafted Fatigue Levia, which was seemed like a strategy he was trying to force or at least lean heavily towards. So the whole idea is that instead of doing the whole Blood Dip thing with Levia, you just play big attacks that demand multiple blocks from the opponent, try and get in with your weapon and try and block a lot. Have rally the rear cards in any color because it allows you to block with your no block cards. And the issue with that strategy is that he said that if I just on turn 1 gone Dread Scythe without making a Soul Shackle, it would just scoop the match. Because his deck was unable to beat the Dread Scythe fatigue. If I could just fatigue him with it. But since I started making Soul Shackles, because that's the only way I knew how to play Chain, he had to try and play it out and try to fatigue me. But since my deck was capable of dealing all damage in arcane damage, that just didn't work against my deck. It was just too good. Yeah. I ended up winning that one as well. I got to play my Chain puzzles for 3 rounds of draft and was feeling very happy. Also, it seemed like 6-0 was enough to lock up top 8. So yeah, that was a pretty nice situation going into the last 3 rounds of Constructed.
So after the draft, how did the tournament went?
Yeah, it's just interesting because I won. So I had my this really important exam paper due for the next day. My plan was that I was gonna have it finished before nationals, but I was missing 4 pages or so, which is gonna take So I was trying to do a little bit between rounds, during the lunch break. I was writing a bit, but it was it's hard to actually concentrate on that during the tournament. And obviously, I'm not a fast Flesh and Blood player because I haven't played it very much, so I was going close to time every round, even though I was playing Lexi. Yeah, and also something about Flesh and Blood I didn't realize is that the tournament just run really smoothly because there's no extra turns. Yeah. So yeah, there's just not much time between rounds. It's pretty nice. But not if you're trying to finish a paper. So I was considering do I just concede the next 3 rounds and just work on my assignment instead? Because that also has a lot of value to me. That means I don't have to go work on it and finish at 2 to 3 a.m. because I knew at this point I'd made top 8, I couldn't possibly miss it. But I also need to win a quarterfinal matchup on the next day, Sunday morning. So I need my sleep, and so it was awkward. And I decided, since I'm playing Lexi, being able to choose who starts is probably important enough that I should try and win 1 more round, or at least try and play around 7 to see. Then I'm paired against Laura, who is from my community, and I was feeling pretty awkward about it because I wanted to concede to her. But then also if I do that, I'd trap myself with more time because then I have to win the next round to get my top spot to be able to choose in the quarters. And then I get less time to work on my assignment. So I thought, I'm just going to try and play here. She's playing Icelander. It's actually the matchup I practice the most. I love playing Lexi against Icelander. It's pretty nice. I decided that I was going to play against her and ended up with a really tight game. There was a spot where I realized that I should have blocked with a Tunic at some point where it was a pretty high life total. Because there was the last chance I had of blocking physical damage with it. And the damage put me in a range where I was close to dead to... I was going to die to the shoes and an Aether Ice Vein plus the ability because I only had because I only had AB1 and so there was a point where I realized that I needed all my mana for my turn to work. But if I do that, I'm actually putting myself dead here. But if I'd blocked with my Tunic, I would have had 1 more life and could have survived the arcane damage. So there was a turn where I was really going in a tank, but the clock was also ticking, and I realized, I'm just gonna have to go for it here because obviously, if the time runs out, this is terrible for both of us. I don't want that to happen. So I had to have a turn where I'm just gonna hope you don't have the 5 damage spell here and just force your hand to block instead. Because otherwise, the issue is if you try and play too conservatively in a spot where you might die, she gets to not need to block with her whole hand. She can arsenal a card, and that actually gives her an opportunity to slow me down even further and eventually kill me with arcane damage anyway. So I thought it was pretty important that I just keep presenting enough damage to eat the hand every turn. And yeah, eventually that worked out and I got there. She didn't have the 5 damage spell in the turn I left it open.
Oh, that was.
Yeah, I definitely felt bad to beat her. Luckily, she like did win anyway, and I got into top 8. And this led me to a spot where I was 7-0. So I'm definitely locked for top 8. I'm also like, my breakers were going to be good enough that in the quarterfinals, I would be the one to choose. So I have basically nothing to play for anymore in these last 2 rounds. I do have a really important assignment that I want to make. So I asked the head judge, hey, is it okay if I just leave? And so I did that. I was playing against Sebastian in round 8, and I could shake his hand and say, yeah, you got it. And then I biked to my university and finished my assignment at like midnight. So worked on it for 4 hours at this point. So yeah, it was quite the experience. It felt like a boss move to be able to do that in the first place. But of course, it also felt a little bit awkward. So I have to just like concede to people. I didn't even know who my round 9 opponent was because I basically just got a match loss for not showing up. Yeah. That's how the judge said, yeah, you can do it, but you're going to get like a match loss. But then we're not going to drop you because we know you're in top 8 the next day. Yes, that definitely... So that all worked out. I was extremely relieved to have the day work out like that. But I also knew that, okay, in the morning I'm going to have to face... I actually was paired against Laura again in the Icelander matchup. So I was like trying to like mentally prepare myself for that. I played 1 match against Julian during that evening, trying to take a break from the writing, where like just to practice the matchup. And like he's a pretty good Icelander pilot, so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing like anything like suboptimal and just never getting punished for it, because that sometimes happens with a deck like Icelander, because you have to play around a bunch of different stuff. And I was doing a lot of, okay, I'm just gonna try and be as efficient as I can, even though I'm getting ice locked. And maybe if we just always do that, sometimes you might get punished by certain things. But since I don't know all the cards necessarily or all the interactions, I was worried that I might, with the way I was playing, leaving myself open to something continuously, but then just happen to never get punished by it. So I didn't want to like get randomly blown out. And so stuff like learning to, okay, every turn I'm gonna think about what happens if she has Blizzard, because that's a card that can really blow you out. And always make sure you have a plan B for it. And so that helped a little bit, but another time you also you kind of just have to go for it, because if you like slow yourself down too much against Icelander, you're just gonna die. So because you can't stop all the arcane damage. And I think, yeah, I think like having that understanding from like card game, like for Magic, of like how to like that you can't always play around everything is pretty important, because that transfers directly into Flesh and Blood.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so I won my quarters, and I was like, oh my god, I'm going to 12. It was crazy. And like from there on out, it was like, I was just trying to like play. It would be fun to be the national champion, right? It would be a good tweet. So I was like, okay, I'm going to play for that now. And the bracket lined up that I could meet Bunde in the finals. So I was hoping that would happen too, because that would be like the ultimate kicking him out of the other. So I played against Victor in the semifinals, who was on Lexi again. Like we played in round 3. And actually I realized after the match that I'd forgotten to sideboard. So I was just playing my Icelander configuration against him. So I didn't have my frailty traps. Okay. Which was a bit awkward, but the way like a sideboard against Icelander is just being as efficient as possible. Of course, I had swapped out my equipment suite, like I didn't play AB into him, but yeah, so we just had another game where we had a lot of tricky things happening with frostbites and so on, but yeah, just incrementally got more and more damage than he did, and then I ended up winning. So I can't explain exactly like what happened in the 2 matches we played that like led me to get so far ahead, but I think it's just that like the list that Julia and I had is just so clean and so consistent at using its card. It doesn't have like too many awkward draws. That's what I think. I think actually having 2 mana, like 1 mana arrows is an issue, and our list doesn't have that. Yeah. Anyways, I was on to the finals. Played against Bunde, lost to Sebastian, so I couldn't play against him. Yeah. But yeah, so I couldn't play against Bunde, but I got to play against Sebastian instead. And as I said, like the perfect like end boss. I was actually like hoping that we will, because I had to concede to him in round 8, so we didn't get to play there. But like this would be the highest stakes playing against him, and I knew that if he beat me, like that would be like perfect. He's like very deserving national champion. But he was playing this like Fatigue Bravo list, and I'd never played against Fatigue Bravo before. I played 1 match at the Armory against another Bravo list, where I almost got Fatigue. And I had a vague idea of, okay, I'm not supposed to do my regular thing against him. He's just gonna block every turn and I'll eventually die. I need to like build up towards something. But the first couple turns was like agony for me because I had no idea how do I do that in practice. Am I supposed to like just not attack very much, try and set up 6 card hands every turn? Do I take too much damage in the other way if I do that? And so, like, eventually I realized, okay, so it's about like, it's okay to pitch inefficiently because any card I pitch is just like, I don't lose it. I'm gonna draw it in second cycle anyway, and I'm gonna try to. I had a point where I had a 3 of a kind in my arsenal that I just sat in my arsenal for like 3 turns because I was trying to wait for my rain racers so I could do the big turn. Yeah. So I was trying to do stuff like that, and it was pretty difficult. And like a lot of turns were like, okay, I did my attacks. You still have cards in hand. I have an arrow I can shoot. The one that started in my arsenal, but I was never sure if I should like shoot it and make him block with his card, or just wait and then he can't use his cards, and I get to have a bigger turn next turn. Like these decisions came up all the time, and I realized afterwards, after talking to him, that it's really important that I make him always block my arrows if he has an empty arsenal, because that way he doesn't get to put a defense reaction in arsenal, and that's what he really wants to do. So yeah, I ended up just without exactly knowing the reasoning, taking the right lines a lot of times. We also we played Shock Charmers into that matchup, which is extremely important because, of course, it's like pretty inefficient to pitch 2 reds or a yellow to deal 1 damage. But since again, like I'm not using the cards I use for that, I'm gonna draw them on second cycle. So actually, just like eking those extra points out of your cards was really important in a lot of spots. And eventually, I just got a little bit of hit in there, a little bit hit in there. There was a point where I had a drill shot that he blocked, and I used the rain racers to push it over the block. And he was like in the tank, and I knew he had the. I figured he would have the like defense 7 reactions that cost 2 cards, and it was like, okay, he had the rampart as his like offhand shield, the one that like you pay mana to block with. I think it's the rampart. And so putting a minus count on that one seemed really important to me. And so he was really thinking, do I let the drill shot hit and lose the minus counter there? Eventually, like, he decides not to. I get the hit in. And I think putting the minus counter there, that felt pretty good. That meant it was harder for him to hit my breakpoints. And there was like, at one of the last turns, I had a turn where I had like 2 arrows in arsenal, but I had my scalers. So I like made the attack. He was like, no blocks. I was like, thinking, do I lose Shock Charmers? I don't use Shock Charmers. You just take the damage from my Endless Arrow. Put it back in my hand. Realize, oh, I forgot to use my scalers. I guess I just put this in my arsenal again and passed the turn. But the thing is that like his version was so defensive that he couldn't really like capitalize on that. So even though that looked really done, it ended up working out fine. It's like a lot of it's very a forgiving matchup as long as you're like the biggest mistake you can do is like just do your usual thing. But it's okay to be inefficient and make a mistake that makes you more inefficient, because he's not gonna punish that. And it ends with me playing a double 3 of a kind turn, 1 from hand, 1 from arsenal, setting up this. So I couldn't actually do much with the cards, but I realized, oh, I'm just gonna pass with 6 cards in hand and 2 in arsenal. Yeah. And yeah, that felt pretty good. That meant that I could push in the final punch of damage. Yeah. And of course it wasn't my plan to begin with to set up that sort of stuff, but yeah, I think I realize now that you can actually play that matchup against any fatigue deck with Lexi where you just play super slowly, maybe pitch stack that combination, and you can just deal like tons and tons of damage by just like being extremely patient and win through fatigue that way. And yeah, then I was the national champion.
So in the end, you bet your opponent. Like you said, he was like the Endgegner.
Yeah.
It will be pretty interesting to see, like, now that we are getting the next set, Bright Lights, that you also mentioned with focus on Mechanologist, if these strategies with Lexi will also come in there or if the meta changes completely. But I want to jump in now for, your deck list. Mm-hmm. And actually show the viewers which card you picked or was given for the tournament.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because this is mostly... So Julian and I did a little bit of work of talking about the cards, and we changed a little bit. Specifically, going up to 3 copies of Yellow Winter Spite was like the big thing that we did together. And so basically the idea of the first list he sent me had 6 codexes and 3 Art of Wars. and not that many arrows. Like going low on arrows for that reason. And the whole reason for the whole philosophy behind this was that you just wanted more power cards. Also, he added a polar blast instead of a few blue arrows.
Yeah.
With the idea that like when you have cards that go into your arsenal randomly, especially with Codex of Inertia, does this a lot. It's like much better to have a polar blast in your arsenal than it is to have a blue arrow. So even though the arrow blocks for 3, it's actually better to just have this effect that you can maybe give a Frostbite and you can just cycle it, and it just plays out much better for you. And then we had some like Winter Spites that we brought in for some matchups, a couple yellow ones, and then we went down to 1 yellow, but we weren't really sure exactly how to like use them. But kind of realized that the Art of Wars don't work super well with these multiple codex, like with the 6 codex build, because it's like hard to have enough cards to do everything, and you end up these awkward hands where you're like, you might not have enough attack actions to make the Art of War good, and then sometimes you have to discard it to Codex, or you like end up with an arsenal randomly from Codex of Inertia, and that's also awkward. And also the fact that like the deck was already worse at blocking because we play like all these 2 blocks with Polar Blast and Codex of Inertia, and so Art of War just makes even worse at playing defense. So in the end, we ended up like deciding to cut those and just add the yellow Winter Spites, because this card, what it does is that it plays super well with the 6 codexes. Because you, like, when you have all these codexes, what you want is just trade cards efficiently. So you can empty your hand and then play the codex. And so Winter Spite, like, is a way that allows you to do this. Where if you had an extra arrow, it's actually going to cost you, like, multiple cards to get that arrow down. Because you need, like, both a pitch to, like, be able to put the arrow in your arsenal and then shoot it. And so you need, like, the arrow and the pitch card. But if you just have the Winter Spite, you can just use that. And maybe you don't shoot as many arrows that turn, but you get to play your codex with an empty hand, while they're also affected because the Winter Spite stole a card from them. Plus, of course, like just having the extra ice cards for Lexi's ability or for Frostlock, like it's definitely not irrelevant. And yeah, I think the yellow Winter Spite just played out perfectly. I could even see you play some number of red ones.
Okay. Frostlock, I know, is for many other Lexi players that don't include that many ice cards in their deck. Not that efficient, but now that we are looking at your list, it makes sense, the road you took down, and it paid off in the end. I see 1 Art of War still is in your list. Like, how did that came up? Would you
was like, we weren't quite sure that it was like okay to cut it completely. It also, it allows you to have a little, like, against stuff like the Bravo deck. I knew Sebastian was likely to play Bravo, and maybe I'm probably gonna have to play against him if I do well. So I wanted to make sure I had like enough attack actions and things that push it through that I end up playing registering the Art of War. Actually, I think Julian had the footwear that like blocks 2. I'm forgetting the name, but gives like go against all your face-up arrows.
Okay.
And like that card is supposedly better than Briar because like you can block the 9 attack crush with like, a 3 block and a 2 block from your equipment, or as an 8 attack crush. Like that. But I was really scared about not having Snapdragon Scalers because I wasn't confident that I'll be able to play around Warmonger's Diplomacy super well. So like this list, for instance, we're not running the Trench and all. So the reason is that like against Icelander, the like Tunic is just better than Trench. Because the extra mana that you get from that one is just, it just adds up. It matters so much. And you can just have your AB and your shoes or somewhere else. Like that's not really important. And there's also these decks that like don't play Tunic at all, but I think there's like many spots where the Trench would just end up like losing your equity. So even though it makes you better against Warmonger's Diplomacy, because for those who don't know, the issue is that if you like end up with a face down card in your arsenal as you end your turn and they play Warmonger's Diplomacy, you can no longer use Lexi to flip it up because Lexi is a non-attack action. So you can, that means like if you can't flip it up, you can only like, the only way you can clear your arsenal to put a second arrow in your arsenal with your Voltaire and give it go again, you have to like shoot the arrow that you have in arsenal already, one that's face down. But that one doesn't have go again, and so your turn just ends. And so Warmonger's Diplomacy can be like pretty backbreaking sometimes if you're not careful. And what the Trench does is that it allows you to just get the face down card out of your arsenal, so you can shoot 2 go again arrows with your bow. And yeah, That makes sense to me, but then you don't have a tunic, and tunic is just like crazy good. So instead, like the way we just do it is that a lot of times it's not going to be that good for them to Warmonger's Diplomacy anyway. Sometimes you happen to have the Falcon Wing in your arsenal anyway, or like something like a Winter's Bite, where they might get punished anyway by using it. And the Snapdragon Scalers means that like the one time it hits and it is actually good, you can get out of it by just shooting your arrow from arsenal and giving it a go again immediately. So the shoes were like the Snapdragon Scalers were my insurance against Warmonger's Diplomacy. And since I thought I wasn't gonna be that good at picking the right spots to play around it, I would rather just not have that headache and I wanted to always make sure I registered Scalers at least in every matchup, but the ones I needed AB. So yeah, that's why I ended up cutting the piece of equipment that Julian was playing, and I just added an Art of War because I didn't know what else to add.
At this point, we sadly had a technical error, and so we are missing the last 5 minutes of the interview. I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and if so, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any further questions regarding Simon's Danish Nationals top and his decklist, please comment down below. And also check out his decklist, including all the notes for the matchups, in the description. Simon and I will continue talking about Flesh and Blood and Magic the Gathering in a second interview, but now you can check out one of the other national champions in an interview here.